Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 16th of January of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from Kiev, from the capital of Ukraine. Today, according to information we have, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, arrived in Kiev, and he had a lot of talks, a lot of conversations with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky. And as a result of these conversations, Ukraine and the United Kingdom have signed a 100-year partnership agreement that was stated by Freedom. The agreement covers a range of areas including defense, energy and trade. This is a very important meeting that gives us the understanding of what kind of things are happening right now between different countries like the United States of America, Russia, United Kingdom, France, Ukraine itself. Furthermore, very interesting situation today took place in Kiev. For example, a Russian military drone was flying near the site of talks between the British Prime Minister and Zelensky in the central Kiev today. So the Russians were telling the Ukrainians and the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, that if they wanted, they would attack the territory of this meeting without any problems. So another important thing, what is this meeting about? Once again, United Kingdom and Ukraine signed a 100-year partnership agreement. So what is all about? The thing is that currently there is a negotiation process between Russia and the Trump's team, the United States of America, and the main point of this negotiation is to finish the war in Ukraine and to give each other, Russia to the United States of America and the United States of America to Russia, security guarantees. So this is the most important. Two superpowers like Russia and the United States of America want to be 100% sure there are going to be no problems, no conflicts between these two countries in the future. And the most important thing that this, according to my understanding of the situation, these security guarantees doesn't cover the United Kingdom, France and many other European countries. Another important statement made by Zelensky today, that the thing is that speaking in Kiev, Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the United States and Germany as well as Hungary and Slovakia are against Ukraine's membership in NATO, which means that Ukraine will never see NATO or will not see NATO in the very near future. But this, when he was talking about this, he didn't say anything about the United Kingdom and France. And during the day during these days we got a lot of updates about France and about United Kingdom about deploying troops in Ukraine. For example, today several Western media published 3 scenarios for deploying British troops in Ukraine. That was stated at least by the Telegraph. The first option is British troops will set up points along the buffer zone to be patrolled by fighter jets and attack helicopters. At the rear, rapid reaction forces and the third-tier armored vehicles are ready to repel any attack. The second option is that the West creates a defensive perimeter around Kiev to allow Ukrainian forces to concentrate on containing Russian troops. And the third option, British instructors conduct training in Western Ukraine with air defense from Poland providing protection. I believe that United Kingdom will use every single scenario, they will combine them all. Furthermore, we got another very important statement from France. For example, those days, France held secret exercises to introduce troops into Ukraine in case of breakthrough from Belarus. French special forces, Roosters, were preparing for a scenario of possible intervention in the conflict in Ukraine, last 4 intelligence online reports. So we see that most likely France and United Kingdom, if Russia and the United States of America gets the agreement, security agreement, and they will sign the papers and the United States of America will exit the Ukrainian conflict, then most likely France and United Kingdom will deploy forces on the territory of Ukraine, maybe even without the permission from the Russian side. So this is the most important, let's say, part from Zelensky. If Ukraine can't enter NATO, then Western countries will deploy forces on the territory of Ukraine. And obviously, this is the situation that will never be accepted by the Russian Federation, because for the Russians, it doesn't matter who controls the line of combat contact. Either the NATO NATO countries or United Kingdom, France or Poland. For the Russians, it's the same. This situation, when the line of combat contact and the border will be under control of the Western countries, means just one thing, that Ukraine will continue receiving weapons, Western countries, NATO will continue sending arms, weapon, they will rebuild the economy, and sooner or later we're gonna see the same story. Ukraine in 10 or 20 years will join both NATO and European Union, and of course, once again, Russia will never accept this. And you see that this is the most important. Zelensky says that if the United States of America doesn't want to give us any guarantees about in the future that Russia will never attack once again the territory of Ukraine, then Western countries should deploy forces here. So, but the Russians are saying no forces, no guarantees. Ukraine should be neutral state, which means that after the 20th of January, it's very difficult to understand how the situation is going to develop. But all these things tell us just one thing, that very likely that during the 2025 we're going to see the clashes, the first clashes between Russia, Ukraine, with the involvement of United Kingdom official forces and France forces as well. And this is going to be probably a huge disaster. Now let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. The Russians accepted that they are not able to restore control over the Suja area by the 20th of January, so that's why the Russians stopped completely. Yes, there are lots of drones that are flying and attacking Ukrainian positions, but it's just the regular military activities. The Russians most likely decided to try to restore control over the Kursk region by the spring, by April or something like this, because by this time they will be able slowly, step by step, without any risk, to attack this direction and restore control over it. Furthermore, and very important thing, I would like to point to attention that for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the Suja from Russian side, we start receiving videos of how the Russians were after withdrawing Ukrainian units on the territory of the Suja itself. In this video we can see Russian drones flying above Suja, hunting and destroying Ukrainian vehicles. All these episodes took place in the southern part of the settlement. Very interesting. So maybe the Russians began the preparation for another, let's say, stage, another wave of offensive operations. Now let's discuss the situation in the Kupiansk direction. For example, as for the northern Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos of how the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack in the Dvorechny direction with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back, but the Russians took defense, digged in deeper and repelled every single Ukrainian attack in this direction. So most likely after several days of Ukraine counterattacks, the Russians will continue their offensive operation with the purpose to outflank the city of Kupiansk from the north. As for the central Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours we got different updates, and the most important is that the Russians continue advancing in the Boguslavka direction, and during the previous 24 hours few more buildings and streets of villages of Zagryzovo and Boguslavka were captured by the Russians. The Russians continue the siege of the settlement of Zeleny Gai from the north, northeast, from the east and from the southeast. The Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in this area with drones, with FABs, so everything, as I understand, is ready in this direction before the Russian assault operation, and maybe during the next 2-3 days the Russians will make first attempt to attack the village of Zeleny Gai. Now let's move further. As for the Liman direction, just regular activities, counter-artillery duels. The Russians were bombing Ukrainian positions, the Ukrainians were after withdrawing the Russian positions, so just the regular things. Very difficult to understand whether the Russians are going to attack or they're going to try to keep the situation as long as possible. Now let's discuss the situation in the Chasiv Yar direction, where the Russians, probably the 5th day in a row, are trying to attack the Ukrainian positions. Right before we start making the video, we got the video from the ground, from the city of Chasiv Yar, that was published by the Russians. We haven't managed to add the video on map, but tomorrow in the morning we will discuss this video in details. The Russians managed to secure the industrial zone completely, and we will try to geolocate the places from this video video, and we will discuss in details later. But as for now, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning the Ukrainians in the northwestern part of the city of Chasiv Yar, in the central part of the city of Chasiv Yar, so which means that Ukrainians are bringing more and more forces in these directions, and this is obviously meat grinder. The fifth day in a row, the Russians are destroying everything that is coming in this direction, so the situation is stable but very difficult. The Ukrainians suffer losses. As for the city of Toretsk, we have lots of updates from this area. As you know, there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the mine of Toretsk, and while the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory, another group of Russian forces during the day made several attempts to cut the main supply lines that goes from the mainland in the direction of this mine. The Ukrainians discovered the redeployment of Russian forces, and they were FPV droning the Russian units in these fields. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to establish physical control over this territory, but this is what they were trying to do. Anyway, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. Most likely tomorrow, the Russians will improve their positions once again, and most likely by the 20th of January, the territory of mine, Toretsk mine, would be cleared and secured by the Russians. Now let's move further. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians reached the outskirts of the settlement of Vadiane Druge. The Russians managed to reach the outskirts of the settlement of Baranovka. Some pro-Russian resources reported that the settlement of Baranovka was even captured by the Russians, but as for now we don't have any geolocations to confirm this. The Ukrainians were trying to slow the Russians down by bombing and attacking the offensive forces, but as you can see, all these actions didn't help the Ukrainians to stop or to slow down the Russians. They managed to improve their positions, and most likely the Russians are not planning to stop. First, the Russians will try to take the settlement of Vadiane Druge, and then the Russians will try to take Baranovka. If they can do this, then the Russians will move their focus towards the settlement of Tarasovka. With these settlements, the Russians will be able to prepare a very powerful foothold before further advancing in the direction of Yablunivka and Alexandra Kalinova, with the purpose to encircle and to cut and cauldron the Ukrainian armed forces that are located in this central part. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. The situation here is very difficult. The Ukrainians are saying that the situation in the city of Pokrovsk is as worse as never, because the Russians are using fiber optic drones massively, and these drones don't have any problem with electronic warfare equipment, and the Russians are flying above the city of Pokrovsk, hunting the Ukrainian vehicles, Ukrainian units, and so on. For example, just in this video we can see dozens of episodes of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian vehicles on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk, and without any problems and without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. And the most important, as you can see according to this video, the Russians with these fiber optic drones have possibilities to fly for 10-15 kilometers behind the line of combat contact, which means that Ukrainians they can't do anything but this. So the several episodes and most episodes took place in the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk. This is obviously something amazing. And furthermore, as for Ukrainian side, we still haven't received almost even a single video that can show us the use of the same technology. And telling the truth, these fiber optic drones is the breaking point in the special military operation. Drones themselves is the breaking point in the special military operation. But by the summer of 2024, both sides managed to find several solutions how to bring these drones down, and now the Russians began using fiber drones massively, and Ukrainians can't do anything with this. Anybody can do anything with this because it's 100% option for the Russian army. Now let's discuss the situation in Zverove. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions. Slowly, step by step, the Russians are advancing on the territory of the settlement, every single day taking more and more territories under complete control. The Ukrainians can't do anything with this. The Ukrainians are falling back. Now let's discuss the situation in the territory of the railways between between the village of Kotlina and Udachne. Today, lots of sources reported that the Russians continued advancing in the direction of Udachne itself and that the Russians continue offensive operation on the territory of Kotlina. As for Udachne, the Russians managed to take under control this industrial zone in the southeastern part of the settlement. This information was provided us by pro-Russian sources. As for the settlement of Kotlina, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, according to pro-Ukrainian deep state, there are very heavy clashes on the territory of these industrial facilities. There are very heavy clashes. Currently, the situation is 50-50, but more precisely, by the morning of the 16th of January of 2025, the situation was 50-50. We don't know for sure how the things were developing during the day, but maybe the Russians managed to improve their positions, and maybe tomorrow we're gonna have additional changes on the ground in Russian favor. So let's wait and see. But if the Ukrainians lose these facilities, this is going to be a huge disaster for the entire western and the northwestern direction, because from these positions, the Russians obviously will make several attempts to attack the village of Sergeyevka. And if Ukrainians lose the village of Sergeyevka, I believe we can start counting days for the city of Pokrovsk itself. This might be the first encirclement of the agglomeration like this. And maybe the Russians are trying to do this because they want to keep the city as much as possible undamaged. They don't want to turn the city of Pokrovsk into Bakhmut. They want people to return back to their homes. They want to restore the city of Pokrovsk, and they want to use the city as a logistic hub for further offensive operation if that happens during the war in Ukraine. Now let's move further. The Russians continue their breaking through operation in the Dnipro direction. Today, several more square kilometers were taken by the Russians. The villages are coming under complete control of the armored force of Russian Federation one by one. It takes up to 1 week to take 1 or 2 villages in this area, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the village of Yasenevo. Most likely within the next 2 days the settlement would be captured by the Russians completely. The Russians continue advancing in the Andreevka fortified area direction. Today, according to different sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the northeastern direction. Let's compare the map. This is the situation by the end of the 15th of January, and this is the situation by the end of the 16th of January. Several mappers, including neutral mappers and pro-Russian mappers, reported about significant progress on the ground. Basically, the Russians currently control up to 20% of this dense network of the fortifications that is located in the northeastern part of Andreevka. The Russians continue advancing the main purpose to cut off TO515 road. As for the Kurakhova direction, there are very heavy clashes in this area. Several sources reported about additional changes on the ground to the south of Dachne. As for the pro-Russian resources, they stated that today, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to answer and to improve their positions in the southeastern part of the settlement. Furthermore, during the day we got lots of videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the northeastern part of the settlement of Dachne, which means that the Russians are preparing themselves to answer the settlement not just from the southeastern part but also from the northeastern part, and they will try to take the settlement in pincers. So we are expecting that this upcoming night between the 16th and the 17th of January, the Russians will try to attack the village from the northeast. When talking about the situation in fields, the Ukrainians continue suffering losses. They try to evacuate as many as possible different assets, tanks, artillery systems, but when they enter the roads with the purpose to evacuate everything from this pocket, the Russians destroyed it immediately. In this video we can see the tank that was damaged and destroyed. In this video we can see several vehicles that were discovered and destroyed by the Russians during the evacuation process. And for example, in this video we can see a group of Ukrainian forces that most likely were waiting for evacuation, but when the evacuation vehicle arrived, the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with everything they have. On the southern part, the Russians continue advancing along the river of Sukhiye Yale, and the Russians are trying to attack the settlement of Olakle from the south and to close this pocket. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the main supply lines between the settlement of Udachne, Ulakli and the mainland. In this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing the main bridge with FABs. At least 2 FABs in this area reached the target. From this video, from this picture, we see that most likely the bridge wasn't destroyed. At least we don't see anything that can tell us that the bridge was destroyed, but the bridge was pretty damaged, and I'm not sure that the Ukrainians are able to use this bridge. Maybe infantry still can cross the bridge, but when talking about vehicles, I have some doubts, and obviously the Russians will continue. As soon as this bridge falls, the Ukrainians in Ulakli and Dachne will lose the lines they can use for evacuation. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians also managed to improve their positions in the direction of the settlement of Rozliv. We have geolocations that can confirm this. Maybe this is not a fresh video because the weather from one video to another differs, but most likely this attack took place not during the previous 24 hours. We just got the geolocation that show us the Russian attempts to attack in the direction of Rozliv, and as a result of this attack, indeed the Russians managed to improve their positions. Just for your notes, this territory was considered by us as a contested area, which means that several days or weeks ago, one of the mappers, both either pro-Ukrainian or neutral, reported about complete control over these fields, and just now we received video that we used to color the territory, so it's not something new. Yes, indeed. When talking about the settlement of Velika and Vasilovka, the number of icons above the settlement tell us everything about the situation on the ground. The Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions heavily, obviously despite the fact that there are still a lot of things to do before taking the Velika and Vasilovka settlement under complete control. The Russians most likely will try to do something before the 20th of January. Obviously they will try to take maybe the village of Vremivka, maybe the Russians will try to take the northern part. Anyway, they will tighten the news around the settlement and to show the world that no chances for Ukrainians to hold their lines. So I believe that this is going to happen. And probably before the 20th of January, the map will be changed for several times in this area, and maybe the Ukrainians will have just 60 or 50% of these territories that you can see right now. Furthermore, we start receiving updates that the Russians began offensive operation in the direction of Vremivka. Furthermore, today several sources reported about the situation on the ground, and the Russians are saying that they indeed managed to improve their position significantly exactly in the vicinity of the settlement of Vremivka. Maybe the city of Vremivka itself was captured, the town, maybe some positions in the fields to the west. The Russians report about significant losses from the Ukrainian side, up to 50 or 60 soldiers just during the battle for the previous 24 hours. So we are waiting for geolocations in videos, and they are going to be, obviously. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.